G'day listeners and welcome to another APS Weekly News Bulletin, keeping you up to date and well informed on the Australian property market in real time. Now today guys, what I'm doing is I'm unpacking the October edition of the CoreLogic's monthly housing chart pack, and that pretty much breaks down specifically the last quarter and how that's looked from a growth perspective. And I'm going to break down the trends, how different markets have grown over the last quarter and then over the last year, and how that's looking like it might play out. First up though, wild stat released over the last week that I want to break down first as well, guys. Australian housing values have now exceeded $11.2 trillion in terms of a combined residential value of the Australian housing market. What I find crazy is a $900 billion jump over the last 12 months. So when I read that, it almost knocked me out of my chair. Almost $1 trillion, so $900 billion jump over the last 12 months. If you throw in another piece of that as well, the debt on the Australian housing market is only $2.3 trillion, or a mere 20.5% LVR on total value, meaning that almost 80% of the Australian housing market is actually unencumbered or carrying no debt. So when you've got almost 80% of the housing market with no debt, and people talk about a bubble, and only 20% of there's only 20% worth of debt on the housing market. That's a pretty crazy stat in terms of how strong the housing market is, underpinned by so much of an actual equity base within the economy, within the housing market, that is. So I thought that was a really cool little thing to, I guess, unpack, guys. And then running through the numbers of the different cities and the growth you've seen, it's interesting the cities, obviously, that have contributed the most over the last 12 months to that $900 billion jump in the last 12 months. Guys, jumping into the growth trends over the past year, over the past quarter and the last year, Australia as a whole up 1% over the last quarter, 6.7% over the year. So still a nice little uptick over the past 12 months for Australian housing in general. Sydney up 0.5% over the quarter, 4.5% over the year. So still on an upward trajectory, not coming back. 4.5% isn't too bad. Melbourne down 1% over the quarter, and over the whole course of the year, down 1.4%. Brisbane up 2.7% for the quarter and up 14.5% over the year. As you can sort of see from that trajectory, it kind of looks like Brisbane may be slowing a little bit. Regardless, 2.7% over a quarter, annualized is over 11% over the year. So it's still really strong, but it is cooling a tad when we look at the 12-month growth trend compared to the last quarter. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out going now into the spring and the end of year market movement trajectory as well. Perth, star performer again, guys, for this year, 4.7% up over the quarter, 24.1% up over the year. If we run off the same stats, the growth trend has slowed a little bit on that front, but still almost 5% over a quarter. You'd be looking at almost 20% over the year, even if that was the run for the next 12 months as well. So 24.1%, guys, over the past year is a massive result, almost 5% for the quarter also. Adelaide, also a really strong result at a 4% growth rate for the quarter, 14.8% over the year. So that, if anything, is actually still continuing with the same steam, if not more, over the past quarter compared to the year. So still some really good steam being witnessed in Adelaide as well, which is really interesting. And I've thrown in a final one here, guys, in Hobart. I'll mention why after this as well. But Hobart down 0.8% over the quarter and down 1.1% annually also. What I found interesting reading through this and going through a few different things in the housing chart pack was that Melbourne and Hobart are both well below their recorded peaks back in March 2022. Hobart's down 5.1% in which is roughly 2.5 years. Actually, it almost is to the date. And Melbourne down 12.5% since that peak in March 22 also. So some pretty crazy sort of numbers there, guys, for those two in terms of their dropping. But the fact that we look at like where housing credit is and how expensive debt is at the moment, and still over the past 12 months, the housing market, the whole Australian market being up 6.7%. Certain markets there, almost 15% between Brisbane and Adelaide. Perth up over 24% in the past 12 months. And a $900 billion jump over the last, in the last year as well. Some pretty crazy stats when you're looking at it from that perspective. And guys, I think this is just going to continue to an extent. It will be isolated to different areas, but I do firmly believe it is going to continue to an extent, and the trajectories of different cities will come in and out as we go forward as well. So it's going to be very interesting to unpack. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into this at the summit in around about a month's time as well, guys. So make sure you're there to catch the APS team live dissecting it on the roundtable, everything to do with the housing market as we wrap up the 12 months of 2024 and the outlook for 2025 as well. So I hope you took some great value out of that. Obviously, breaking down the way the market has been ticking up over the last quarter and the last 12 months as well. And if you took some great value, guys, make sure you send it on to someone else you might know who also might take some great value. And until next week, guys, that's another APS Weekly News Bulletin on the Scouting Australia podcast.